All right. Thanks, everybody. We we're coming back from our activity. I'm so interested to hear people's feedback. Heidi, thanks for putting that activity together. Let's start online. There's a couple of questions here. If you just want to share out. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, this is on you.
Okay. So
No, I wanted to thank you.
Okay.
we'd love to hear from their group. What'd you learn? What did your partner say that their why of choosing this complex social issue?
I can jump in first. What I learned was the desire to help people live and thrive and not just live their reality, how they want to live and be able to thrive in that was what we landed on in some of that.
Thank you. Mayor,
Yeah, and I think and Noel, yeah, and Nicole's thanks Nicole, and man, my house is so loud, sorry. Nicole's main why I think is that she doesn't want to see people in pain. You know, ultimately, that we're all ultimately similar as people. We want to enjoy our lives and not be in pain. So you know, part of this whole effort of meeting people's basic needs allows people to allows people to not be in pain ultimately.
thank you. We'll start over on this side this time. Yeah, that's you.
Me? No, I was taken by the level of compassion. So it comes down to compassion and caring about people. And, so, Holly, right? Yeah. Had talked, just that fundamental belief that, we need to help each other. We lose ourselves as humans and humanity if we don't support and help one another. So that was something that resonated with me.
Thank you.
And I think we're very much aligned in
Yeah.
that respect. Like, we, as humans, we're obligated fundamentally to help other humans.
Thank you.
Also, the system has to change.
Oh, yeah, yes,
Oh, yeah.
we did have our
Sorry.
chat.
No, you're good, you're good. That's
Where's the
important.
post-it?
Post-it with the-
Somebody be in charge of that.
That's another thing.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead. So because, who was your partner? Oh, I'm sorry, Barbara, thank you. So because people who are experiencing homelessness are someone's son, daughter, sister, brother, they are real people, and they are people experiencing pain and harm. And we need to make sure that the policies we work on aren't marginalizing or creating harm. Thank you.
So a theme in us digging into Lauren's why was serving the marginalized, making sure that we support those individuals and give a voice to those who might not be able or don't have a seat at the table to be heard. And honestly, at the end of the day, Lauren likes challenging problems and wants to help. Is willing to step up and do that.
Thank you.
So, I work with Jana. Sorry. I think a big takeaway that we definitely got was what kind of an impact local government can have on this, in such a way that might be greater and broader than the federal, like the funding, of course, but the connection and community understanding of the local government serving people in need in this capacity is just so great. The quality of life, just that the equity and opportunity to a basic level of quality of life is deserved by everyone. Along the theme of the suffering, not having people suffering. The second and third order effects that having unstable housing does to people.
And I'll just add a little bit of Jen's why to that. I think that housing instability impacts everything else. And so for Jen, there's a lot of root in sort of social justice, fairness, and wanting to do my part.
I met Megan, and the summary for me about Megan's why was the desire to help people who are in vulnerable situations, because she understands it's connected to a whole lot of other factors.
And I would say kind of almost to echo Lauren, Martha, was the responsibility to help marginalized communities that lack representation in all these rooms, that your access, responsibility to use your access.
So, everybody. What are our common threads?
People want to support others.
I think the common thread is people in all of this. I mean, it probably seems obvious to us, but a lot of times the issue of homelessness is without a home, but it's the people that we're trying to help that I hear through all of this. Whether we're, as somebody said, losing our humanity, that people, it's real people, that, you know, it affects everything else.
Thank you.
She captured that good.
So I wonder, and I think that is a really great capture, right? Because it can get so, the work can get so technical and it can get so pulled in by all of the processes and everything else. I agree. I think that's where we all are, is like, it's actually about people in our community. So I think the question is, okay, so if we focus there, then can we put our approaches, would that help us?
Yeah. I do have something I want to add, and so it made me think about, so all of our why really centers around the individual, the person, and supporting people who most need it. And so then I go back to think about, you know, we're not just, our mission, our goal is not just to provide housing to get people off the streets, but every one of us talked about that supportive services that really gets people to that self-sustaining space where they can be successful in whatever endeavor they go after the transitional housing or permanent supportive housing. So so I think how it's so intertwined. It's not just providing the shelter, but it's providing the supports that go with it. I think they go hand in hand.
Not to leave you guys hanging on a cliff. We did want to kind of talk about the why and kind of root into the purpose, right? And so just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we think through, you know, next steps, next discussions, and what not to do.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, so we talked in the last session about what we know has worked, which is supportive services coupled with housing. Housing first is recognizing how housing it's not housing only, it's both. And, you know, alignment with the federal pillars that we are rooted in equity, recognizing that systemic racism is why we see disproportionate representation of BIPOC populations in the unhoused. In fact, Boulder County, if you are a African American or Black identifying individual, you are 5 times more likely to be in the homeless community than the general population. That's a fact. Evidence that we look at our data and we think about our data and we adjust our system to the trends that are emerging. That's a little complicated when it comes to equity because there's this thing called fair housing, which is a great thing. And we can't assign housing based on protected classes. And so how do we move upstream and leverage our data to really identify upstream across the system where we're seeing inequities and we can intervene accordingly and make sure that access is equitable. Collaboration, that's why we're here. And homelessness prevention, we've talked about that pretty extensively. You can exit people out of homelessness, but your exits are only as good as the people that are not falling into homelessness. Homeless response, which is that crisis response, that's street outreach, that's shelter, that's coordinated entry, that's housing retention. All of these pieces move across the pipeline. And then of course, housing, supportive services, and then collaborative governance structures, which we reviewed last time. So just kind of rooting us back to a nice quick 20-second summary of what we talked about last time. And staff, Liberto, take us away.
Yeah, I'll start. I'll take unfunded mandates. But before I start, I think what we do want to say is that I think as staff, we recognize that you as elected officials have all sorts of pressures on you, both internally, externally from staff and people you work with, but also you receive all sorts of messages from the community residents, you know, issues that they're facing that they're dealing with as well. And so when we talked about what not to do, we really wanted to talk about what can we provide to ensure that however you all respond policy-wise, it's setting both our local governments, our staff, and our for success, right? And so one of the things that we really want to avoid are things like unfunded mandates. And this happens a lot at the federal level, right? Where we set policy like, well, we're going to make sure that this many people are housed, or we're going to make sure that, you know, and yet we don't provide the resources that are actually needed to ensure that these mandates actually happen. So we just want, when we were talking as a group about this, we want to make sure that our local people understand that whatever route we go, whatever potential new idea comes up, that there is thought about how you sustain it, right? Because there's a lot of different ideas out there, and a lot of innovations out there, and we're not saying that's not a bad thing. And you know, if you can't sustain an innovative idea, then really you are that's not being trauma informed, because that could lead people having expectations, and they've already been failed by so many systems, and then for us to fail them because we can't continue something, that just adds to the trauma that they've already experienced. So yeah, just understand that you all have all sorts of pressures from all sorts of sides, and how do we be wise and good stewards of our resources to make sure that whatever we do is sustainable.
And then for the shifts away for evidence-based programs, kind of goes back to Heidi's pillars. Like, we do know what works. So whether it be the prevention, the housing, the supportive services, everything you all have already talked about is what works to solve this issue. And so we often get sucked into spirals of let's look what everyone else is doing, and always good work. So it's not like I'm saying that's all. It's always good things, and then it's always helping people. But we do know what does work. We know that supportive services paired with housing works. We know that prevention works. We know that all of these things that we've already discussed on the previous, and everything you all have discussed in this room as your priorities, works. So it's kind of trying to stay focused on those things. And then creation of programs that don't have direct ties to housing resolution. The other thing that is always
holds people is trying to manage the issue as opposed to solve the issue. And sometimes the issue does need to be managed. Shelters, outreach are all very important pieces of the continuum, but it's all, I've been an outreach worker and I've worked in a shelter. It's very hard to interact with individuals if you're like, well, I don't know how to get you out of here. So recognizing that housing is the solution. So we can provide these sheltering services that are very important, outreach services very important, but we also have to go the next step and provide the solution in housing.
And then creating new programs that can't be built to scale. So kind of going with what Ellie Burton says, we can pilot something, but if we're not ready to invest in the scaling of it, we should probably not pilot it in the first place. And also looking at large cities like Los Angeles County. I'm pretty sure we're not Los Angeles County. And seeing how they leverage their budget. They have a lot more money than we do. And they also have a lot more folks experiencing homeless than we do. And it's great to look at things from a philosophical perspective, but saying that we can copy and paste what Los Angeles County is doing or Houston is really challenging because there's nuance there. And that goes into our next one, which is increased barriers to affordable housing creation. Houston's a prime example. They have 0 zoning laws. So it's easy for them to do the things that they do and create the affordable housing and like really significantly decrease their homelessness in such a rapid time because they can build it. They can build micro communities. They can build micro apartments. They can build 50 tower apartment complexes and no one's gonna stop them. And so as we're thinking about the creation of affordable housing, what barriers have we created? And where is there space that we can assess our zoning and our ordinances that may be barriers to the creation of these challenges? Where's our red tape? Where's our processes that can be improved? I think the average rubber stampy, I think in Denver, rubber stampy that it takes for a project to be approved is 25 people. And so imagine how many delays that is. And so do we have those challenges? Is that something that we can assess? So that was our answer to the what not to do.
Thank you guys for being here about this. I'm sure there were easy ones, but you can tell that you dug into it. Thank you.
Great, thank you all. Do folks have questions? Could you go back to that last slide again? And one, taking notes here.
We're happy to send this
Okay.
as well.
Oh, thank you.
So I do have a question about creating new programs that can't be scaled. I totally see that. And at the same time, I'm wondering, okay, so then how do we discover what programs will work? Right?
I mean, that's the forever challenge, right? Like we can pilot things, but we need to be very mindful about our pilots. We need to be very intentional on what our outcomes are. I think a prime example is the Be There and Other outreach teams in Boulder and Longmont. That was a pilot. And we were very, very intentional about those targeted outcomes from the very beginning. And also to recognize that if we couldn't reach those outcomes, then we needed to let it go and find something better. And also be prepared to fully invest in it if the outcomes were successful as we expected them to be. And it has been a very successful approach in both municipalities and it led to folks that are literally 20, 30 years unsheltered homelessness now are housed and never stayed at a shelter. And so that has been one of those criteria that was really important to us. So I think if we do anything that's piloted, it's small, it's very targeted, it's very with deep intent, and also being prepared to fully invest in it and scale it up if the outcomes are what we expect them to be.
I would add, the other thing to think about is, there's a lot of creative people around this country, not just in Boulder, that are doing things. And I think our job as staff, and I think we're doing a good job, we're doing this evaluation of HSBC, and part of that is literature review about what's going on. And I think part of our job is we can go out and ask. I know I talked to Grand Junction about some things that they're doing, and I'm learning to see how is this pilot project, how are you doing it? So I think it's also it's not just us piloting it, it's us being aware and open to do research by reaching out to our fellow municipalities around the state and outside the state to learn how they're doing it, knowing there's nuances here, but trying to get as best a picture of how to implement it as well.
And that's something we do daily. In the next 2 weeks, I'm actually meeting with Charlottesville, Virginia and Salt Lake City, Utah, because they're curious about what we're doing. And so they want to know, they see our outcomes and they're really impressed and they want to know how they can replicate it. But we're also curious about what they do. And how, what is it that they're doing that maybe we could take on that, no one across the country, even the globe, with the exception of Norway, has solved homelessness. And so I think there's an opportunity that for all of us, and we always do explore conversations about, hey, have you tried? And what about this? And it's mutual across the board.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions? And the what not to do?
For me, it'd be surprising.
I wouldn't say they were surprising. We did in organized conversation touch on the policies employment topic. And I'm curious if, and that came up in the context of, the lines between our municipalities are visible. Yet policies could be so different. And how that could impact this population we're talking about. And I'm curious, are there any that you know of that rise to the surface that we could evaluate as a working group to make sure, this particular policy, if we were all aligned, it could help, create forward momentum towards a solution, or, does that make sense?
Big bunch, actually. And some of them around, open space access and, encampments and RVs and cars, and none of those are the same across the entire county. Height restrictions is a big one. I mean, the difference between one property you build in one community and another was the difference of 15 additional people being housed because of height restrictions. And so I'm sure we could spend the rest of our next 4 months exploring what those policies are and those barriers and those challenges, because they are very unique and they're all different, and there's no common ground across any of the municipalities and even the county around those zoning programs.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily to derail the bullet points, the funding, the creation of housing that we talked about. But I was just curious if that's something maybe that could be worked on in parallel, that, locally, our municipalities can have our staff be guided. As we evaluate these things, we also, some of us, Roseville, we're working on our 10-year comp plan, right? We just completed our housing stuff. I'm sure there's other areas that have done that as well. That can really look to your expertise to guide us and steps.
Yeah, I really appreciate this discussion. I think that, as we think about where we have areas of influence versus, areas of control, right? Where the policy is somewhere that we actually have control over in our community. And so our ability to actually make a difference in that area is pretty significant, especially if we could all do something collectively. So. Makes me think back to what areas of focus we're thinking about, and it feels like one that could be maybe an important one to look at.
Well, I was gonna ask, would you go back to I'm pointing to the agreement slide. Would you bring that one back up for a minute? Because I was thinking similar, council member. I am listening to you as well. I mean, for me, I don't know that it's advocacy. For me, if that was something the group wanted to focus on, we could, to me, it's bullet point 2. If we want to support the creation of affordable housing by addressing barriers in zoning. Or, I mean, if we decided we wanted to focus on choosing an area. Unless you all, again, unless you said, actually, we just said we want to do it at third bullet. That's really about barriers that exist regionally to whatever that ends up being.
I kind of feel like I could see these as like three very amorphous blobs right now in terms of topic areas that we could dive into. And it almost feels like maybe we go one step farther with each one of these and see where like the next level of detail might lead us so that we, and then might have a better idea of what concrete steps could come out of latching on to each one of these, and that might help us decide what direction we want to go further in. Because for me, I have a hard time right now just weighing them based on kind of the amorphous form that they're at.
Were there other comments about the what not to do list?
I think to the unfunded mandates, creating new programs that can scale ties back into a common thread I heard at the beginning of the meeting, which is, for many of us, we can't necessarily support via staff or funding standing up resources within our own communities, but partnering to strengthen our applications to get funding, to build up and support the services that are data proven to make an impact. I think we were unknowingly not doing what we're not supposed to do at the beginning, there's a lot of negative nots in that, but I think, so it sounds to me like we're heading in the direction maybe that staff was kind of moving with them.
Staff, any additional pieces that maybe came up after the list and listening to the conversation that you want to add in the
I think the one that comes up for me, and I know Commissioner Lichman and I've had conversations about this really extensively, which is how the Metro Area County Commissioners landed on their priority. And this goes back to what Ellie Berto said about unfunded federal mandates. HUD says housing plus supportive services is where it's at, and we're watching them cut supportive service dollars. And so, we have to make up those differences in some way, shape, or form. And that's how the Metro Area County Commissioners really landed on, we need to find sustainable funding streams for supportive services. And, Medicaid was one, and, that went through last session. But we still have like a 50% gap. Like the last analysis we did around how much Medicaid would reimburse is only 50%. So where does that other 50% come from? And so that's, I think, our biggest struggle.
Just to add on to the importance of supportive services and just sort of state level things that we see happening in new developments, for example, Chapa has an approved a new development that did not have a services component attached to it all of last year. We expect that trend to continue. And there's not funding for that. So we can't build it into our projects, right? Or it doesn't count as a construction cost. So it's very difficult to layer that level of funding. So I just want to note that supportive service funding is very difficult and kind of a hidden role of being required in new developments.
Then just becomes a revolving door, right? We work hard to get people into housing, and then if they're not supported, the turnaround time for them being homeless again is just
I think the Swedes is a prime example. I mean, we worked really hard to turn that around. But the Swedes in Longmont was a old school PSH where they didn't come with supportive services. And we've seen the consequences of that. And we've been able to turn it around by providing those supportive services. And it's, as I check, leveling out in a good way.
Really is, yeah. We just talked to council last night about the program and just how we're really putting our services on a continuum so that at the end of the day, we can really use our core response team in the way that it was intended. And so if there's something that our on-site clinicians can handle without, having court called all the time. And a lot of times it's residents calling, I need to talk to somebody, and the system that we have now is that they'll communicate with the on-site clinician. Already, I think in the last month, there's been like 3 or 4 diversions to that, and people are still getting the keys back.
All right. We have a couple directions we can go here. So I wanted to make sure that if anybody else has some ideas, just after this conversation tonight about what the next steps be, this is the time to, but that Councilmember Sampson, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question on the last statements. Are we saying the Health and Human Services funding is dropping, or are we saying that HUD or the state DOLA housing programs are reducing in their ability to provide for human services?
Supportive. Yeah.
Are you speaking to supportive services council members specifically?
Yeah. What I just heard you all say is that you're seeing a reduction in supportive services with housing. And I wasn't sure if that was with the Health and Human Services grants or funding, or if that was the percentage that HUD allows with their funding.
Heidi, can you talk about the federal funding and then we can talk about?
Yeah. So the federal funding, so HUD has traditionally had an allocation of funds that is paired with vouchers for supportive services. Those funds have slowly been peeled back. So they're great at giving us lots of vouchers. So like the emergency housing vouchers is a prime example of that. When the CARES Act came, they gave housing authorities that were performing really well this one-time boost of emergency housing vouchers. They came with 0 support service dollars. So we were really lucky. I'm trying to speak loud enough so you can hear me, so I'm not yelling at you guys. We were really fortunate that we had already established an infrastructure of what we call move up and move on. So those that have been in PSH for a really long time and are thriving, and they really just need the long-term subsidy. And then those that are in rapid rehousing that, there's no way that they could pay market rate, but they're still doing really good. And so we were able to leverage those vouchers, knowing that the supported service dollars were not available with those that have already received those benefits, and make sure that they maintain housing. But there was no way we could pair those vouchers with those that are experiencing literal homelessness. There's no way. And that's what we're seeing HUD really do. And that's even on the DOLA side. DOLA has historically allocated state housing vouchers with supportive service dollars. They are now only doing that for new builds, not current funded programs. So Lee Hill in Boulder proper is one of the first permanent supportive housing facilities that the city has ever existed in the county. We at the county have to help try to supplement those funds because those vouchers, those are different in the sense that the COC, Continuum of Care, covers those vouchers. Those do come with supportive services, but it's not enough. So we do have to supplement that. But in 5 years from now, the new build, Zinnia, that Councilwoman Hidalgo Faring is talking about, will not have sustainable funds. So DOLA is great at giving new builds 5 years and then you gotta figure it out. But those that are old and have been grandfathered in, we're kind of on our own.
And then just to the human service, $1,800, yes, there's been a reduction in those county funds, about 25% this year.
Thank you.
Here's what I'm wondering, just looking at the clock of about 15 minutes or so. We have 2 more meetings scheduled for this group.
We need to talk about that date.
Oh,
'Cause it's the housing. Yeah, we're all gone. All the housing staff are not available on our next scheduled.
oh,
date.
that's right. So we have 1 more meeting scheduled?
We have one scheduled with the option to schedule more if it's.
Okay. Got it. We had that conversation. Okay. So right now we have 1 meeting scheduled. We were originally scheduling 3 meetings, so this wasn't an internal project no matter what, in our initial vision. And I think we need to have that conversation. How many more meetings does this group feel like we need to have? Not to solve the issue, but our task from that larger summit really was about regionally what, as electeds, can we agree to focus on? So I just want to be clear, like, this is not, we're not supposed to now do all the work, right? But that's the task. And so, and it might be that we say there's 2, there's 3, there's 4, there's 5. Here's the focuses that as elected, we are going to, with the going back and forth with your boards and councils, everybody's in agreement, or the majority of folks are in agreement to move a regional statement forward. Here's what we think that we will do. And that in itself might be for the next 2 years, right? Because again, the world evolves and councils evolve and all those pieces too. Yes.
Going back to the issues the things that we can control as elected officials, that is the policies. I would like to be able to have a conversation or even just an outline of what are best practices for breaking down barriers, for equitable policy. That's something that we all in Boulder County can be in alignment with as we're moving forward in our councils and boards. You know, I guess I just would want to know, like, there were some things like I didn't realize in the past, I had never really considered height restrictions being something as a barrier to equity, but it is. And oh, okay, you know, so things that even though I've been, you know, social justice advocate for many, many years, there are certain things in regard to policy and housing that I'm not familiar with. So what, you know, what are some things that we could be doing to break down barriers and build equitable policy within our own municipalities?
I actually did a training internally. I think you both remember this, in like 2020, 2021, which was the history of affordable housing with a race equity lens. And I invited some national, they just happen to be friends of mine, national urban planners who have done this training. It was recorded. I'm happy to share it. It's really good. It was a really good training. And it does talk about the historical policies, not just redlining, but all the other ones that are still at play today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm happy to share that.
Would folks be interested in this? Yeah, I would love to receive that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for offering that. So I think that,
That would help us tackle, you know, the supporting creation of affordable housing. I mean, once we get our policies in check, I think that helps break down a lot of barriers for number 2.
I guess my question is, like, is the idea that we come out of this with something that each of our councils promises to work on, like, again, individually, or are we trying to come with this with something that we're continuing to work on collectively?
For me, I'm interested in what a regional approach connected to the all-in-one framework can Boulder County elected officials agree to focus on. That won't stop all the work that I'm doing, and it won't stop all the work that BCHA is doing or our housing department, either in development or in support services. What other, I can tell you have a curiosity.
Well, now I don't know. That doesn't totally make sense to me in terms of what that is. Maybe I'm just being dense about it, but.
No, I mean, I think, so here's what for me, I believe this table and the folks online collectively, if we could all agree and say, we are all gonna focus on advocacy for funding. For me, I believe it needs to be a little more defined. Funding of A. Doesn't mean that because some of us are working with issues of homelessness in the mountains on USFS land. So that team is still going to be focusing on that partnership and that work and different support services to that need. And it would still give us the ability to, we are going to work on policy that is about funding A. We're going to come legislatively together. We could decide, you know what, we're going to meet every other month for the next year just to focus on that and try and look at policy around letter A. We're going to look at legislation around letter A. We're going to look at literally collecting together, going to the Capitol. I mean, to me, then it broadens, but it's collectively, I think we're way stronger. And that's kind of what we did at MAC. Like, okay, if we're representing millions of people at MAC, then let's use our elected official hats in this way. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Does that bring up questions?
Are you asking whether or not we want to select just one of these bullets?
Well, I think not yet. I think that's a great question. Not yet. I think but just like conceptually, what would it mean for us to do regional work? Can I get a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a celebration if like just that, what I'm just finishing saying around conceptually what we need to get to at the end of whatever amount of meetings? Is that where everybody else is at? Absolutely.
So what I think I heard you say is that at the end of this, you're hoping bullet points that we all agree on, or regional approaches we benefit from. And so if a topic or a grant or something comes up that aligns with any of those bullet points, then we all come together and work on it. We're still all working. As well. Is that?
Yes, with the caveat of, for me personally, it could be one bullet point. But that group, we need to make the decision of how long that list will.
Yeah, whatever. That
Everything else, yes.
Yeah, okay. It's on that list, get together. We all just do it.
Well, I guess I'm wondering because it felt like at the beginning of this meeting, we started out and everybody seemed to support number 2. And that seems to be where the energy is. And I'm wondering if what you're saying is we still need to get to how we're going to do that. And that's why I was confused if we are trying to do that on both of them, if we're doing that, or if we're trying to narrow it to one.
Thank you.
And my thought is, yeah, if we're narrowing it to one, let's go to the one that everybody supports. And then, yeah, let's take the next. If the question is, we need to get down to the how and get down to the steps, then I think that makes sense for another meeting.
Thank you.
I think what I'm hearing, just kind of going back to our activity in the video, I think we've landed on our why, which is great. The what is not yet defined, and we can't get to the how without.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for me, I wonder about using October 9th meeting. Does that date work for everybody? Okay.
I will have to join virtually at parent-teacher conferences that night.
You're
So
gonna bring
I've-
all your kids.
No, no, I'm actually scheduling.
So awesome.
Sit down.
So, okay, so, and I believe
What was the date again? I'm sorry.
October 9th,
Okay, yep.
which is another
think-
Wednesday evening. What I think we should do is 7:21. I think we come back to this and the homework, and everybody can add anything else to the homework list like we did last time. I believe we look at this and come back with whatever pieces in there that you might want to change. And the most obvious one I think was 1, 2, and 3. And breaking up bullet 2 into 2 different bullet points. And then I think to your question, Councilmember Sampson, I think then we actually just focus on that and which of those or all of them. And I think we need to define them or give them a little bit more specificity. I think that was one of the things you said, Councilmember Kurtz, which I agree. I think that's where we can focus on our time. I think we watched the video or the training that Heidi's going to send. Are there any other resources that people need to see? There was some data points that.
Commissioner, I wonder if it would be useful for the group, we could compile some information about family homelessness programs, just background information, and also send that out over email, volunteering for a job. But I think it might be helpful for the groups and family homelessness.
Thank you for capturing that. And I want to just go back to the post-it question from earlier on school districts. Does this group need to hear from people here at this meeting from BBSD or SBBSD? Would that be helpful to anybody? Or if we get the data and just send that over, is that all we need? I'm fine either way. I just want to ask because we've talked about both.
And maybe we could share what we have and then ask the question again. Like if that brings up additional information that we need, because some of what we have is that connection to.
Yeah, if given the presentation in a similar, like at a different meeting, there's a recording we could listen to, or just like, however the background information comes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that way we can focus the meeting on these particular topics. I'd be good with watching a video or looking at the information you compile.
Thank you. Janet, do you feel like you have enough questions from the group about what they would like to see in data? Or do you want to give folks a chance to?
If I may suggest, why don't we give you what we've got? Because there may be wonderings that you have that we don't have, and that would require a little bit maybe more time. I'd like to get the homework assignment out fairly quickly. So let's give you what we've got. And if you have follow-up questions, we can always come back together and try that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay. Yes.
Do we want to clarify if we're extending, because we're getting into the holiday season and time gets really crazy?
Yeah. Thank you for bringing us back to that question. So we have a meeting scheduled for the 9th. Just with the group and knowing what we know and the information and how we're working together, do people feel like we can accomplish that goal on October 9th? Or do we feel like we need another meeting and we should look at an alternative to November-ish?
The housing.
I believe in us. We can do it on the 9th.
We can do it on the night.
Yeah, we're all in Keystone at a state conference.
On this October 9th?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I misunderstood the number. Oh, because we met August, September. So we'll have to reschedule that 9th either way.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. Right, so
Yeah.
Mayor, I apologize. The meeting will be a different date than the 9th anyway. But we know we'll try and have an October meeting.
Unless you guys want to meet without us, which we're more than happy to let you guys.
I think we'll accept staff support. So we'll reschedule that October meeting. So can we do this in one meeting? I heard one enthusiastic, we can get this done in one more meeting.
Give it a good try.
Yeah. I think we can.
Let's try to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love it. I appreciate everybody. I just really quickly, so that's all you've got? Of course, there's nothing else pending, no other sticky note items. The only one else I had was, there was a question about policy barriers to affordable housing.
Which I'm gonna send
Use
the,
them
I'm gonna
now.
send the training.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have that on my home. So.
I, thank you, all of you. Like, this is intense work, and I appreciate Heidi, your work to get us here, and Jana as well, just the support piece of it. And everybody who's.
And the policy team.
That's where I was going. Everybody who's staff, you all do not sign up to do evening meetings every night of the week. We do as electeds. When we say we want to represent, that means 24/7, but we really can't do this work without you. We cannot move the needle on this topic of homelessness without all of you. And you are the experts. And so what I really appreciate about electeds in this conversation is really trying, and I kept hearing that, like trying to keep up here and not get into the weeds, as I've been told. So I really appreciate it. We all do. So thank you. We're done. We're good. Thanks for the staff support. If anybody needs some other food, grab something.
The leftovers, Natalie does not want to see him tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.